Is that light okay?
That's great.
That's better.
There.
Now I'm going to move this popping up thing. Okay. Pauline, can you hear me okay through the microphone?
No. Turn that off. Oh, it's on. Sorry, I heard you fine a second ago.
I need the input to be this. Right?
The input is this.
Okay.
Input is this.
Okay.
Output is the speakers, but you don't need the
Okay.
speakers to be cranked up.
Okay.
So, let's see.
Joey says sound is good.
Okay, good.
How about now? Can you hear me now, Pauline?
I don't know. I can't hear you. That's too. Hold on a second.
Can you just look?
It's up. It's all good.
Can you look at it? Yeah.
Yes, I did. I was just
Will you
there.
just look at it right talking now
Yep.
instead of talking? Watch it.
Yeah, it's working fine. Okay, I can hear it.
It'd be nice if you could hear what's going on.
I know. I'm working on it. It's probably just something like click on here. Oh, okay. Now talking.
Okay. How's that? Amy says she has a bunch of questions. Talk louder? How's that? Amy says you talked about this growing season being the last viable one. I talked about the potential for this growing season being the last viable one. What do you think that will look like next year? Will stuff not germinate or get burnt up before harvest? You said you only had 2 questions. So I'm not sure we'll see an adequate harvest this year from the grains that are harvested in the fall. Here I'm thinking about corn and soybeans that the United States, and to a lesser extent the world, relies upon. If that's the case, then things could fall apart quite rapidly this fall. And that could easily happen as a result of the severe weather we had over the central part of North America throughout the growing season, starting in late spring and continuing from floods at the beginning of the growing season to a drought at the end of the growing season. So I think that might answer your question. If not, please re-ask it. COVID-19 effect on global dimming. That's, I think, what disrupted the weather systems throughout this interior of the United States. Also, people were measuring nitrous oxides as a relatively heavy molecule that can be measured easily by satellite. People were measuring nitrous oxides over China and particularly over the Wuhan region, and they dropped off catastrophically as soon as COVID-19 broke out there. Next place it broke out was in India. Again, measurements indicated abrupt heating would follow, and they did in both places, in fact. And then shortly after that, it was a large area in Eurasia that was impacted, with the resulting, as expected, high rises in temperature. What do I think of invasive species? Are they as bad as biologists say, or should we use them since they adapt much faster? I was, for a while, on the governor's task force. Pauline, you don't have to send me those anymore. I was on the governor's task force in the state of Arizona when I was on campus. It was called the Governor's Invasive Species Task Force. And there's a reason that people have been warning about the impacts of non-indigenous species for a long time. It's because they're catastrophic in terms of native ecosystems. Yes, they're as bad as biologists say they are, at least as bad as this biologist is saying they are. That said, there's a handful of non-indigenous species to which we have become very well adapted and accustomed to using. Things like potatoes come to mind. Most of the food crops of the world are non-indigenous. And so there's a delicate balance to play here. If we were to toss out all the non-indigenous species, depending upon how far we go back to describe indigenous, well, then we'd have to get rid of all the Caucasian people in North America, wouldn't we? And going back a little further, we'd have to get rid of all the people in North America, because people didn't exist in North America not that long ago. So I hope that answers your question. I'm moving on now. What is the exact end time of the world? For a lot of people, it already came and went. Do you think COVID-19 is human-made? No, there's substantial evidence to indicate that it came from nature, that we, whoever we are, did not create it. Have you run your statistics using a quantum computer? I've never had a quantum computer. And no, I don't have access to a quantum computer. As I've said a few times in response to the question, do I think Hawaii and other places will be better island? states, for example? No, absolutely not. Because of the aerosol masking effect. The aerosol masking effect is so great, and this is what people repeatedly fail to understand no matter how many times I explain it. As little as a 20% decline in industrial activity leads to a 1 degree Celsius global average temperature rise. That doesn't sound like a lot because we're accustomed to great variations in temperature throughout our daily lives. It's not about us as individuals and our ability to walk in and out of rooms that are warm and cold. The problem is we rely upon nature, the whole thing. It's not a problem, it's a fact. We rely upon many, many other species for our own survival. An abrupt 1C rise in global average temperature is going to destroy habitat for almost every species on Earth, certainly including the species that rely upon a bunch of other species. That's us, as explained by the Stroner and Bradshaw paper in November 2018. So we rely upon a bunch of other species. We are not as independent as we think we are as a species, as individuals, as communities. Is a blue ocean event possible this year? Yes, of course. It's possible. How do I convince my neighbors to not buy that new dinette set? You let them buy it. No judgment, folks. No blame, no shame. At the edge of extinction, only love remains. Leave your damn neighbors alone. Let them do what they want. It'd be nice if they were informed, but whether they buy the dinette set or not it's not going to do anything. Do you believe beyond this mass extinction, the nuclear power plants will be deactivated, made safe for the planet's survival? No, absolutely not. It takes 5 or 6 decades to safely decommission a nuclear power plant. We haven't even started. There's 450 or 460, some of them. Are we at 2C over the 1750 baseline? Yes, according to 2 or 3 of my most recent peer-reviewed articles. Yes, we are. That's just not me saying so. That's in one case 8 of my peers who reviewed the manuscript. That's in another case 3 of my peers who reviewed the manuscript. That's at least a dozen of us who are saying, yes, we are over the 2 degrees C over the 1750 baseline. Why is Alaska cold this year? Probably I don't know for sure because I don't study every state. I don't study every weather station. There are more than 15,000 in the United States alone. But it probably has to do with the polar vortex making some areas cold while other areas are hot. This is why starting in the 1980s, climate scientists began calling it climate change instead of global warming. Yes, it's overall planetary warming, but that causes cold weather in some places, particularly at some times a year, and not in others. Is COVID-19 another form of extinction? Well, yes, as I indicated in one of my recent journal articles, COVID-19 could be the trigger for human extinction. COVID-19 could very well reduce industrial activity at various places around the globe sufficiently to cause loss of masking that would be 20% or so reduction in industrial activity that would drive a 1 degree Celsius global average temperature rise. Emissions are likely to be less than they have been. Yes, and I'm not sure the relationship between emissions and industrial activity. The people who work on the aerosol masking effect, so-called global dimming, focus on reduction in industrial activity, not reduction in carbon emissions. So I don't know that anybody has correlated those two, and that seems like an important thing. Am I seeing species loss in Florida or algae blooms? No, but I'm not paying any particular attention either, because we've been in quarantine essentially the entire time we've been here, and the only indications or examples of nature that we see are within this neighborhood. we are not in a position to comment on whether we're losing species in Florida or not. How long would you estimate an ice-free Arctic blue ocean event would need to be for it to significantly affect weather and crops? If we get ice-free for a couple of weeks in September versus several weeks in the summer, I strongly suspect that it will be that first ice-free Arctic event that drives a profound rise in regional and then leading to global average temperature. Oh, I missed a question there. Again, Western Canada having cold weather. That matches what the person from Alaska said. So I strongly suspect that it will only take days or a minimum of a few weeks to profoundly affect weather patterns around the globe. So that blue ocean event, that ice-free Arctic Ocean, doesn't need to last forever, probably not even more than a week or so, to have a profound disruption. As I explained last time in this live stream, it's with respect to albedo, the situation is either you got ice or you don't have ice. If you have ice, that provides for reflectance. If you don't have ice, that means that the ocean is soaking up the heat. So it's a binary system for the most part. And that loss of albedo is going to have a profound impact on temperature. People are still having children because they are not informed about climate change. Who is? Us? We are a small percentage. Yeah, people are still having children because most people don't know anything about climate change of any kind. Enough people in this country don't know enough about it that they vote in politicians who are abject deniers of climate change, of anthropogenic climate change. If temperature will rise, will the fat gammons die out first? I'm thin and suffered bullying from fat bastards when young, hence the question. I think we're all going at pretty much the same time due to the aerosol masking effect. The loss of aerosol masking is far more important than almost anybody else is willing to admit. I encourage you to go to guymcpherson.com and do a little tiny bit of research on the thousands of hours of research I've done on the aerosol masking effect. It's amazing that cruise ships are still being built. Not really. The people behind the money building the cruise ships and promoting most other industrial activity around the globe know about aerosol masking. They want to continue to benefit from the work of others until the last day on the planet. Why is global warming not a better expression than climate change? I just explained that about 5 minutes ago. Global warming used to be the term, and it's overall average planetary warming that we're talking about, but it produces climate changes that are different in different areas, cold in some places, hot in others, as a result of a global average increase in temperature. Is the reduction of emissions due to coronavirus enough to save the planet? No, it's pointing the wrong way. Remember, a decline in emissions also leads to a reduction in aerosols. We can't afford to lose the aerosol masking effect, even 20% of it, without driving a 1 degree temperature increase. So the brainwashing continues. The idea that we have to reduce emissions and that will solve all our problems has been demonstrated to be abjectly false a few hundred times now. And so trying to reduce emissions in the absence of dealing with the aerosol masking effect is a terrible idea. The people who are promoting that, people like Deep Green Resistance and Idle No More, and most notably Derek Lying Jensen, are trying to accelerate extinction of humans and every other species on the earth by reducing industrial activity. That's a terrible idea. If you want to drive all life on earth to extinction, stop driving, stop flying, reduce industrial activity. That's the way to take us down as quickly as possible, us and every other species on the planet, because in addition to triggering a 5 to 6 degree global average temperature rise as a result of a slowdown in industrial activity, that slowdown also undoubtedly leads to a catastrophic meltdown of the world's 400 and some nuclear power plants. As I quoted in a paper that's currently in press with the Journal of Natural Sciences, there's a paper by Mousseau and Moeller published earlier this year called Plants in the Light of Ionizing Radiation. What have we learned from Chernobyl, Fukushima, and other hot places? It's in the Frontiers in Plant Science, and it indicates that the meltdown of nuclear power plants will kill all plants on Earth. We need plants. That's how we eat. So there's no going back to hunting and gathering. There's no changing our lifestyle, becoming indigenous ourselves, and expecting that to solve the climate change problem for us. It's not. It's going to drive our extinction even faster than what we're doing through increased or maintained industrial activity. Do you think the UV effect from ozone depletion contributed in the Devonian, I think you mean Devonian extinction event, has a part to play in the coming one too? Yes, absolutely. In fact, there's already, as I mentioned in my very long essay, the 32,000 word essay, and Nature Bats Last, Climate Change Summary and Update, the reduction in ozone is already underway and is already contributing to local temperature increases. Any updates on Dr. Tao's mere research at Harvard? No. He has about 50, well, I guess I do have an update. He has about 15 undergraduate students who have volunteered to work with him this summer, and he is seeking funding to try to support them and try to support his ongoing research. There is somebody who I don't want to name without his or her permission who is connected to real money in Silicon Valley. And that kind of money could actually get this thing off the ground in time, perhaps, to mitigate for the aerosol masking effect and also for global average temperature rise from other sources. So I can't say much more than that, except the conversation is still going on. Dr. Tao has a lot of volunteers who are trying to help him. And at this point, there's some real money that needs to be infused into the Harvard system before that's going to get much rapid headway. Why is there so much controversy about the aerosol masking effect? It makes so much sense. Because you got assholes, excuse my language, you have dickheads and assholes like Derek Jensen who benefit personally, individually, from continuing to lie about it. So they've been lying their whole lives. That's their whole brand, is bringing down industrial civilization. So if you're committed to a lie long enough, you actually start believing that the lie is true. We've had peer-reviewed evidence since at least 1929 about the aerosol masking effect. I suspect it's been unrevealed to the masses, as I indicated in one of my papers in Clinical Psychology Forum, because there's money to be made by having you and I reduce emissions, but not other people reduce emissions. So as long as we keep the aerosol masking effect intact through high end levels of industrial activity, it doesn't matter who the contributors are. So if you were a bajillionaire, you would want other people to stop using the oil you see as your own and the coal that you see as your own. So I think that has a big part to do with what's going on here. Lying at multiple levels, not revealing the full truth in order to maintain privilege in one capacity or another. So the more coal, the better. That's not what I said. This happens every time I try to explain facts. Somebody twists my words and says that I want to do something that I don't want to do. I'm just relaying information. You do with it whatever you want. Burning coal certainly is responsible for most of the aerosol masking effect. So it is at the same time keeping us cool and warming us up. What you do with that information is up to you. Don't put it on me and say that I did this and that and the other thing. So think about it. Don't join that class of assholes that accuses me of things that I haven't said. Homo sapiens is approximately 315,000 years old, by the way. And no, that's not millions of years. Kurt Vonnegut said towards the end of his life, we could have saved the world, but we were too damn cheap, or something like that. And at this point, I don't know that it's possible to save the world or even our own species for much longer, no matter how much we spend on it. But at some point, we could have. Yes, humans have been around. Something we resemble as humans has been around for far longer than the 315,000 years of Homo sapiens. That's a good point. Sorry, I didn't bring that up. We've been around for a few million years, depending upon how you define human. But something that most of us would recognize as cousins, at least, walking upright and so on, has been around for a few million years, not for a few 100,000 years. The methane in the atmosphere has increased and is increasing. Is there going to be a huge burp as described by Shakova and colleagues at the 2008 meeting? I don't know. Could be. They did not indicate that an ice-free Arctic was necessary for that disruption, which they said could occur at any time. At any time. Yes, Hans, it is Anders Angstrom who wrote that first paper in 1929 about the aerosol masking effect. Thanks for pointing that out. Do you agree with Kevin Anderson that about 20% richest people are responsible for 1/3 of CO2? I haven't done the numbers, but that sounds about right to me. The mob, Millennium Alliance for Humanity and the Biosphere, I think, put out a post recently with a co-author of Paul Ehrlich and one or two others, and it was titled Too Many Rich People. And that's right. It's not that there are too many people generally. If the Earth could support 7.7 or 7.8 billion people if we all lived like monks, for example. But we have too many rich people. It's a combination of the number of people and the consumption by those people that produces the profound ecological impact. Ecologists such as Garrett Hardin and Paul Ehrlich have been pointing this out since the 1960s. You think anybody's paying attention? No, because there's no money in paying attention. So, in addition, we're fighting evolution here. Evolution by natural selection screams at us to make babies. That's why every species throughout all of Earth's history has been successful is because of procreation. So if you don't procreate, imagine if everybody on the planet decided not to procreate and that decision was made in, say, 1800. Oops, nobody would be here. We wouldn't have this conversation. So at some point, we all want our parents to have procreated, or we wouldn't be here. At least most of us want that. and so trying to play catch up at this late date is a little ridiculous. Can we process particles and elements, shift an electron from one element to another, changing its atomic number? Oh, wow. This is a high level of physics with which I'm not prepared to respond because I don't know anything. That reminds me, bear in mind that most climate scientists are physicists and engineers, and I'm not. And I receive a lot of heat for this every day. And I don't claim to be a climate scientist. I'm a conservation biologist. So that's right. I'm not a climate scientist, and there are questions that I am not in a good position to answer, including that one about elements and molecules and blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, I would argue that physicists are not in a good position to answer questions about human habitat. They are not in a good position to answer questions about extinction. And that's where we're headed, sports fans, like it or not. I don't know the date, but it was a woman named Eunice Foote who theorized that changes in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere could affect the Earth's atmosphere. The first peer-reviewed journal article, however, and that's what I frequently cite, is from 1896. And there were a few other people in the 1850s, 1860s that were putting those links together and at least writing about them, but there was no empirical evidence for quite a while after that. Do you think dominance hierarchy is a suitable societal system for humans? No. And yet here we are. It's a little late to change that, isn't it? It's a patriarchal, hierarchical system. And at this point, trying to escape from that is, I don't think, going to work. Tribal people of South America have little or no immunity because they have been social distanced and isolated. Is it really a good idea to do that? And again, I'm not talking about good ideas. I'm presenting facts. So whether you think it's a good idea or not, what do I care? I'm just pointing out the evidence here and where it takes us. Yes, most climate scientists appropriate that title since the actual field did not exist until very recently. That's correct. Even universities, to my knowledge, there is no graduate or undergraduate major in climate science or anything resembling that. There is a PhD minor in a few universities for climate change, but that's as close as it gets. Who is Tim Bob? I can't remember his last name. I've never met. He's in England, and his first name is Tim. And I'm just guessing here, but I bet his middle name is Robert. Would some species survive if all nuclear reactors, et cetera, were dismantled? I don't think so, because we have triggered a 5 to 6 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise in the near future. And that's all it takes, according to the paper by Strona and Bradshaw in November 2018, to cause extinction of all life on Earth. So, has public funding been set up for Dr. Tao's work? Not to my knowledge. So sorry, I can't share a URL there. And I've been working hard along with somebody who's on this chat. Thank you very much for that. To try to get Dr. Tao to recognize the urgency of the moment. And so far, I have been met with the same response that I expect from all academics, and that I probably employed when I was an academic, that we need to do these 37 things before we can decide to do the next 38 things. And so the approach has been very conservative, very incremental, and that has provided us with incredibly reliable knowledge. That's how the process of scientific inquiry has worked, and has worked well. But we're now in a situation that the house is on fire. The fire trucks don't even know that the house is on fire, and they're 27 miles away. It's a far more urgent situation than we've ever faced before. So that approach of that very conservative approach that leads to peer-reviewed literature is, in my opinion, incapable of having us deal with the house that's on fire, and the house is the planet. What event do you think would be the first one to express itself to all people on this globe to get the message? Yes, global warming went out of control. I think for a large number of people, the only thing that will work is if and when they die from lethal wet bulb temperatures, when their organs are failing because they have been exposed to high levels of heat and humidity. Then and only then will they take their last breath and go, hey, that climate change thing, there might be something to that. I'm sorry, that sounds cynical, but I've been talking about climate change since the early 1980s, and talking about it as a really serious matter for the last 20 years. And I don't see much urgency in a response from anybody, including the people who really should know better. My impression of deep adaptation and Jim Bendel's work, it's really interesting, because I recently came under attack, not in the peer-reviewed literature, of course. I've never been attacked in the peer-reviewed literature, because the work I promulgate is incredibly conservative. I was recently attacked for being quoted by Jim Bendel in his deep adaptation work. And is it something that gives you solace? No. Would you stand behind it or support it as a regenerative model? No. Therapeutic model? No. We have models that work for all those things, and deep adaptation is not them. Deep adaptation, as near as I can tell, goes 3/4 of the way and then lies about the rest, describing things that we need to do that if we did them, they would make the situation worse. Again, failing to acknowledge the aerosol masking effect. How hard could that be? You're smart people. You claim that you can process information through the peer-reviewed literature, except that one. That one you completely ignore. So I think deep adaptation and deep green resistance fall into the same bucket. They're lying by omission. And they know, I know that those people know about the aerosol masking effect, because I've shared my work with them. And also because they routinely cite 90% of my work and then get to the aerosol masking effect and decide, oh, that's not worthy. Come on. What kind of economic system you think we should move on if capitalism is over? I don't think it matters. Civilization is the heat engine. Civilization through socialism, through capitalism, through any whatever is driving. So if we're looking at this from the standpoint only of abrupt climate change, then I don't think it matters. Would I like to believe that we could go back to a couple of hundred years in time and not have disaster capitalism as employed in the United States be the outcome? I would love that. Of course. I'm not an idiot, but mistakes have been made. Is the superheating of the Arctic in contrast to Antarctica in part explainable by permafrost melt and clathrate degradation? One, the superheating of the Arctic is not in contrast to Antarctica. Antarctica is superheating as well. The ice melt there is breaking all kinds of records on a very regular basis. So I don't think it's accurate to say that the superheating the Arctic can be contrasted with the non-superheating of the Antarctic. That said, Antarctica has a huge amount of land ice and a huge amount of ice generally compared to the Arctic. So what's explaining the rapid melting of ice in the Arctic compared to the Antarctic, and as a consequence, the increased temperature in the Arctic as opposed to the Antarctic? I suspect it has a lot to do with the very, very limited albedo in the Arctic, as the ice is, for all practical purposes, gone at this point. It's down to less than a third of what it was when measurements began and with satellites in 1979. In Antarctica, there's still a lot of ice remaining. And by the way, certainly terrestrial permafrost and subsea methane release, clathrate degradation, as pointed out by Ben, yes, those are absolutely going on in the Arctic region. I wish there was more time for a Going Dart update / part 2 documentary. Me too. Let's all vote for that. Because all the things I voted for have worked out great. If all the countries in the world would work together, how long would it take us to repair our mistakes? Or is it impossible? It's impossible. I don't know how many thousand different ways I can say this. The aerosol masking effect in response to a relatively slow reduction in industrial activity contrasted with abrupt heating going on right now that takes us to the Pliocene as early as 2030, ignoring aerosol masking effect, ignoring 6 dozen self-reinforcing feedback loops, we're done. There's nothing to be done except get a time machine, and we don't have a time machine. There's an earthquake in the Bering Sea today. What do you make of that? Anything or just natural occurrence? Almost certainly it's part of tectonic plate movement as a result of abrupt climate change. And I've explained this a few times. I'll do it again. We have, for example, no props. How could I have no props? Okay. So this is the North American plate. Look, it's yellow. It's got a bunch of ice on it. And that ice is in the form of glaciers. This is the Pacific plate, overlain by the Pacific Ocean. We warm the planet up. A bunch of the ice from the North Atlantic plate melts, becomes water, and goes onto the Pacific plate. Well, what do you know? That lightens up the North American plate so that it rises, and it makes the Pacific plate heavier so that it falls. And you see what's going on at the intersection between these two? There's movement of continental plates. Volcanoes, earthquakes, those are the expected outcome when you have movement of those plates and they start grinding against each other and moving up and down and sideways and trying to find an easy way out. So there was an earthquake in the Bering Sea today. Could very well be as a result of abrupt climate change. These two have been linked and have been demonstrated, I've been pointing out for years. Doomsday Glacier teetering on the edge of collapse, raising sea levels up to 2 feet, triggering ice collapse across all the western half of Antarctica. Yeah, of course. Ted Montana, giving up is foolish. If doomed to die, go full speed ahead and try to develop technologies to counter it. Have I ever suggested giving up? Or are you just another one of those assholes who wants to read into my work that I'm suggesting something I'm not? Oh, I suspect it's the latter. Giving up is foolish? I've never even suggested giving up. I've made far greater sacrifices than you can even imagine, Ted Montana. I have lived outside of the monetary system for a really long time, and that was by choice. I lived off grid for years. What the hell have you done? Anything? Anything? Have you given up any privilege at all while claiming that we need to, whatever? Jesus Christ, people. Yes. Yes. Thank you for the people donating on here as we're moving along. I very much appreciate the time you're spending here because time is short. And thank you also for supporting my really bad ice cream habit and the other things I eat too. How would one balance Dr. Tao's ideas with mirrors in conjunction with emissions reduction to maintain the aerosol masking effect? That's exactly what that project is about. And I've been working with EA now for longer than a year. Sorry, Dr. Tao for longer than a year. And other people are involved as well who are experts on various aspects of what we need to accomplish. So it's way too much to go into in any sort of detail here, but it's a multidisciplinary, multi-pronged approach to dealing with abrupt climate change generally. It's not just about mirrors reflecting light back. It's about everything. We know what's going on in the world. It will take an enormous amount of money and probably more time than we have to deal with the problem. But we're still trying to deal with the problem. How do we get involved with the Mirrors Project? I don't know. Talk to your favorite billionaire. Tell them to get in touch with Ye Tao at the Roland Institute at Harvard. Have them get in touch with me. At this point, I don't know that there is a fundraising effort at the scale that could be supported by folks like you and me. I don't think that's happening. I don't foresee that happening in the near future, but maybe it will in the near future. In any event, because of issues with intellectual copyright and ownership, the dread that led to the demise of our society, there's not much I can do at this point except point you to Dr. Tao and his research lab. His email address, which I don't have right here handy, can be easily found by typing in Roland Institute, Rowland, Harvard, Ye Tao. It'll pop right up, his email address. And Ye Tao is YETAO. Okay. How do I buy? Where'd it go? How do I buy you a beer? Thanks. Thanks, Alicia. I don't drink beer. You can buy Pauline a beer, though, through PayPal. Send me PayPal. Click on the donation button here, and I'll buy Pauline a beer. Roland is spelled Rowland, Roland Institute. "18C by 2026 is possible, according to Sam Carana." Comment? Yes. Yes, it's possible. With the rapid melt, do you think DOE this year? It could happen. I don't know whether it will. I'd give it 50-50 at this point. Is there any efforts to fix the problem that you see as promising if there's some by chance with enough time? Yes. As I've said about 20 times so far today, yes. The MIRS project at Harvard's Roland Institute, headed by Dr. Ye Tao, is the only promising approach that I see. So please look up Roland Institute, Harvard University, Ye, that's Y-E, Tao, T-A-O, and ask how you can help. And most notably, if you find a billionaire or two, send them that way. In your recent paper, you said about the effects of recent loss of aerosol will be experienced only after the summer, so we could expect multi-crop failures. Yes. I think we can expect crop failures this fall. Like I've said several times already on this chat, with respect to the big ones, soybeans and corn or maize, we can expect crop failures this year. Now, it could be that the aerosol masking effect declined over different parts of the planet at different times of the year, starting in February, March, and going on right now in other places. So it could be that those were all spread out enough that we are not going to see a catastrophic grain harvest. That would surprise me very much. I think we will see a catastrophic decline in the grain harvest. But if we don't, I'd be pretty darned happy about it. And that would give us maybe a little bit more time to squeeze through the bottleneck. So if you're into hoping and praying, now's the time for that. What is your favorite ice cream? Any kind of ice cream that I can store in a freezer works for me. Meg, no way. 18 degrees Celsius. Yes way, Meg. It's possible. In 6 years. Yes, it's possible. In 6 years. I think most people don't understand how sensitive, that's the term climate scientists use, how sensitive the atmosphere is to heating. So yes, it's possible. And again, thank you. I see donations coming in and they say things like, thank you. None of them so far has said, go get ice cream or beer. I thank you anyway. So the planet is, as indicated by abundant recent evidence, very sensitive. Planetary heating can occur very rapidly. You know, we have physicists like James Hansen going around saying that you can't kill people that easily with respect to die-off of human beings. Really? I bet you can. What are we seeing right now with COVID-19? People are not dying slowly. People are dying very, very rapidly. So, and let's look at other examples. Say, for example, the San Benedicto rock wren, which lived entirely on San Benedicto Island, an island off the Pacific coast of Mexico. And then on August 1st, 1952, the San Benedicto Island blew up in a volcano. And that moment, there was no longer habitat for the San Benedicto rock wren. The San Benedicto rock wren was functionally extinct that day, and took less than 2 weeks before nobody ever saw another one again. Less than 2 weeks. There were thousands of these birds. Oh, did I mention they can fly? They could fly. They could go to other islands. We can't go to other planets, but these birds could go to other islands in the area, and they undoubtedly did. And what did they find? There wasn't habitat for the San Benedicto rock wren there. So to think that we can't go extinct in 6 years is utter human hubris on classic display. Of course we can go extinct. How long will it take you to die? For some people, it's very quickly. For others, it's a dragged out, horrible, miserable affair. But yes, humans can go extinct quickly. Are philosophers classed as scientists by scientists? Interestingly, philosophy and science were viewed as the same thing all the way from the days of ancient Greece until the early 1900s. And then the final nail was put in the coffin with the establishment of the National Science Foundation in 1945, I believe, when the head of the National Science Foundation was one of these people who thought philosophers were just in the corner philosophizing without any scientific support. So that was the final nail in the coffin. But philosophy and science started out as one thing, started out as rationalists on the same path. And then over time, scientists became more specialized. Philosophers came to focus more on the life of the mind and less on the mechanics of the scientific process. So philosophers and scientists used to be the exact same thing. And I've written about this a few times at the blog, guymcpherson.com. But now they are viewed as being completely disparate entities. And I don't know why. I don't think that makes any sense. On the other hand, every legitimate scientist earns a PhD degree. What do those letters stand for? Doctor of Philosophy. So at some level, we're still willing to admit that scientists are philosophers, but for the most part, we don't. We sort of claim they're mechanics who work on the engine or something like that. Interesting. My opinion on Jared Diamond's book, Collapse. Great ideas. He explains in amazing detail. And then he goes on to deny that it could happen to humans, which I find fascinating, or that it could happen to the United States. Sorry. And I find that fascinating. So apparently, once you're living in Southern California, that sort of information no longer applies. Hans, wow. Thank you for that extremely generous donation. What about parapsychology and science? I like the way you put those in two categories, just exactly where they belong. No, it would not have to be a massive release in methane to have such huge spike in a short period of time. Not at all. All it would take is a small reduction in the aerosol masking effect, a small reduction, 20%, maybe less. So that would drive a 1 degree global average temperature rise. 1 degree is enough to wipe out probably most of the species on the planet. And by the way, that will certainly get rid of humans. And once we get rid of humans, then we have catastrophic meltdown in nuclear power plants and additional loss of aerosol masking, not from 20%, but to 100%. Now we're talking about real temperature change affecting ecosystems and every species in them. We could certainly have a very abrupt rise in global average temperature, the likes of which we have never witnessed because we would never survive it. Did I say pray? If I did, it was only as a joke. Some of this is really funny.
Share it out loud.
I'm still reading. I'm trying to catch up. I'm not seeing any questions.
Read the funny one.
And it keeps switching around too. How much time will be left after reaching 5 degrees Celsius? I mean, how long would it take human extinctions after touching that temperature? I'd be very surprised if there's a human on the planet at 3 or 3.5 degrees above the 1750 baseline, much less 5. 5 is no humans except bunkers being immersed in ionizing radiation, and alternatively hot and cold, hungry all the time. And certainly there's no ice cream involved, so why bother? That last part was a joke, folks. Do you think aliens are watching us and laughing? Really? You think this is a laughing matter? Maybe it is. I don't know. Do I meditate? Yes. Lizard people called oligarchs are laughing. So that's pretty much the same thing as aliens, right? Oh, Ted, you're killing me, man. 1 degree increase. There are lots of creatures living in volcanic vents that would disagree. I think El Nino and La Nina demonstrate nature can surprise us. There has never been a 1 degree Celsius global average temperature rise in a matter of months. Never. Count it. None. Zero. No species is going to be able to adapt, even the ones in your volcanic vents, because guess what? They rely upon other species. I don't know how many thousand times I can say the same damn thing. We rely upon other species. Other species rely upon other species. Do you think there's one species out there that's just sailing along on its own, doesn't need any other species on the planet to survive? There's not. Yes, Zach Labbe has great research, by the way. He is, I believe he's an assistant professor at the University of California, Riverside. He started doing his research when he was a graduate student at Stanford. And he has great images frequently about the Arctic ice and how rapidly it's disappeared. Why is the southern hemisphere jet stream so much stronger than the northern hemisphere jet stream? I didn't know it was, and I don't know why. I've not done any research into the matter. How long will it take to see the major effects after touching 3 degrees Celsius? If we're talking global average temperature rise, you have to bear in mind that's 1 degree temperature higher than we've experienced so far since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution 270 years ago. So you're going to make that happen in a matter of weeks with loss of aerosol masking. We would realize the effects the next growing season, and they would be profound. Ted, I'm working on solutions. The only solution I think has any chance at all of making a difference. I'm working on that already. It's spending way more than my time than I have to spend on that project. I'm spending still 12 to 16 hours a day doing work I haven't been paid for more than 11 years. So I'm trying to do what I can here. And again, thank you for the donors who are making financial contributions here. It makes it easier for me to continue my work. Somebody's asking about the elephant die-off and other large-scale die-offs. I suspect this is due to loss of habitat locally. They might have been due to poisoning instead. I don't know. I'm not there. But there are ongoing examples of loss of habitat at various places around the globe. So when a species loses habitat, the individuals of the species die virtually immediately. Humans manage to live in some places that do not provide habitat for human animals, but that's only because we import food and water from areas that do represent habitat. So yes, we can live in nuclear submarines. Yes, we can live on the International Space Station. Where do all the inputs come from that allow us to live in those places? Here on Earth, where we grow food, where we have the water, and so on. Which areas of the planet are going to be greatly affected first? I don't think very many people would have predicted that the Arctic would be one of the places that would be so profoundly affected. And yet it is. I don't think most people would have predicted that Tasmania, the southern island state of Australia, would be burning up with wildfires. But that's been going on. So every place is being affected around the planet. Where's the last place that's going to have a human being living in what we might consider normal conditions, meaning within a set of civilized living arrangements? I don't know. What would a possible La Nina this year do to the climate in the current climate mix of reduced aerosols, etc.? Sam Carana pointed out that the El Nino predicted for this year and predicted in the peer-reviewed literature using an entirely new method back a few years ago, predicted that this year we would have a significant El Nino southern oscillation. And that would produce the same consequence that all El Nino Southern Oscillations produce: an abrupt release of temperature from the ocean and also an abrupt release of carbon dioxide from the ocean. So that means the heat that is stored in the ocean, and a very large majority of the heat gets stored in the ocean, and CO2 also, before it is released. And the El Nino Southern Oscillation is the event that triggers that. So that could produce a very abrupt rise in temperature that leads, I don't think it will be enough to cause human extinction this year, as Sam Carana says, but it might warm up the planet enough that next year the crop harvest will be significantly reduced. So we always have to keep in mind the timing. The global average temperature rises locally, regionally, globally in response to loss of aerosols, loss of dimming from aerosols. But the biological and ecological impacts are not felt by the planet until certain times of the year. So, for example, we had a huge event in terms of a reduction in industrial activity, and it happened at the perfect time during late winter and early spring, over Wuhan and then throughout China and India and so forth. If we feel the impacts, it's going to be this fall, because that's when the plants are going to respond. So there's a lag between when the biological and ecological impacts are felt and when an event occurs. So you don't die when somebody fires a pistol at your head. You die when the bullet hits your head or shortly thereafter. And I'm not saying this is as fast as a bullet. Think longer time scales for reduction of industrial activity and then planetary heating, sufficient to cause biological and ecological impacts that then affect our way of life. And there are no safe places. What's your favorite / most memorable habitat or slice of nature you've been able or to see or visit? That's a great question. I spent my life in rural northern Idaho and saw natural beauty there that is unparalleled in the Northern Rockies, unparalleled throughout the world. Think Great Teton Mountains for the whole region. That's where I grew up. And so that was pretty amazing. More recently, the Central American country of Belize is spectacular, but biologically rich environment like I'd never experienced before. Some amazing places out there. Thank you, Jan or John or Jan. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Mr. Schlosser. See, you got two names I can't pronounce. You got to know that Pentagon / CIA know about this. Yeah, of course. I had an NSA contracted spy following me around on campus in 1996. 1996. I was a young person then. There was none of this. How else can we amplify the message? You could invite me to give a presentation via Zoom and then promote it so that all of your friends, soon to be ex-friends, and family members have an opportunity to see it. You could share GuyMcPherson.com with people that you come across. Tell them that If they're open-minded, they might want to take a look. I don't know what else to do. It's not that I don't like to watch movies. It's that I feel like I just don't have the time. I would rather do other things than watch movies. I guess that's a better way to say it. I've actually enjoyed 2 or 3 of the films I've seen in my life. Angie, I think they know, and I think they listen, and that's why NSA contracted spy Mark Austin, that's his cover name, is going around telling people that their models don't predict an ice-free Arctic until 2034 or so. Well, that's ridiculous. So I think that they're trying to take advantage of their relationship with the media to promote the idea that we have a lot longer than we have, therefore allow the money to keep going to the 1%ers. No, I haven't looked at Andrew Glickson's article about a Younger Dryas stadial event at the Arctic News blog spot. But I have great respect for Andrew Glickson and his ability to collate and synthesize data. If I could go back in time to warn us, what year would be more profound? I don't know at what point we made the wrong turn that mattered. I think that we've made thousands of wrong turns as a species, and a lot of them mattered. And it's more than 100 years ago, because aerosol masking published in the paper in 1929 was almost identical in that paper published in 1929 as it was published in a paper by James Hansen and colleagues in 2011. So reduction in aerosol masking in the 1920s would have heated the planet. And in fact, planetary cooling was observed and reported in a 2019 paper during the Roman Empire. At the height of the Roman Empire, there was aerosol masking, regionally at least. No. I didn't enjoy the 2 or 3 movies that I watched. I enjoyed 2 or 3 of the hundreds of movies that I have watched. I don't like them all. Okay, so this is a ridiculous comment that I have to point out. Zoxilix, plandemic corona, is serving the oligarchy very well. That's an idiotic statement. That is pure ignorance or stupidity, probably both. If you would just read the papers I put out in the peer-reviewed journal article, you would recognize that nobody on this, or certainly not the oligarchs, want a reduction in industrial activity that your so-called plandemic is going to cause. So take your stupid somewhere else. Yes, the southwestern United States is in the midst of a mega drought. What data would you like to be wrong if you could pick it? Ooh, that's a fine question. Probably all the data about the aerosol masking effect, but we have to go back 100 years plus to scrub those data from the planetary data set. But that at least would give us an option. It would mean that my moving to an off-grid homestead that I spent $1 million to create wouldn't have been a mistake. But in light of the full evidence, it's a huge mistake. So it'll be nice if that hadn't happened. LOTR, what is that, Meg? Yes, our friend who sold his houseboat more than 11 years ago now lives house sitting and pet sitting for no pay. No pay. He's Canadian. He's just living off the money he made up until the time he bailed out of the system about 11 and a half years ago. Over my head, Zoxylix? I don't think so. I have not read Kropotkin's Mutual Aid, A Factor to Evolution. Kropotkin is certainly among my favorite anarchist thinkers. I would have to say, though, that Edward Abbey is my favorite. It would take a lot more than a couple of volcanoes to give us more time. Thanks, Tim Bob. Great quote from Edward Abbey. Oh, Lord of the Rings. Sorry, never read it, never watched any of the movies. Do I ever eat at McDonald's? No. What kind of disgusting question is that? Have I ever heard of the Georgia Guidestones? Yes, and a lot of other nonsense too. But I don't spend my time thinking about it or talking about it. How can we bring climate justice to poor people, say in India? Mainstream environmentalism seldom bothers with the poor. That's exactly right, because mainstream environmentalism is corporate environmentalism, and that means it's about the money. How can we bring climate justice to the poor people? The same way you can bring all justice to poor people. You can act like a decent human being yourself. You can try to promote in your community legislation, regulations that provide for equality among men and women and people of color and people of all ages. There are all kinds of things that we can do. And if we could go back in time 315,000 years, we might have a chance of implementing all those to great positive effect. What year did you realize there was no hope for the future? 2002, I was working on a book subsequently published in 2003. It was a book about climate change, and I was one of the two editors of the book. So I read all these manuscripts from people that became chapters, and they dealt with every aspect of climate change, from soil plant water relations to atmospheric phenomena. And I was convinced in 2002 that we didn't have long. The evidence has been coming in very strongly in support of that idea since then. Are you for Biden or Trump? No. I haven't voted for years. I haven't registered to vote for years. I'm an anarchist. Do you have a post office box for donations? Yes. Send me an email message or contact Pauline on Facebook. My email address is publicly available at guymcpherson.com under the About tab. Give to your local food bank. I think that's a great idea. Oh, a comment on Jevons paradox? Yeah, so there's various pieces to Jevons paradox, but most notably is the one that there's really no such thing as conservation. When you have a finite material, such as, for example, oil or coal, Jevons was writing about coal in his book published in 1865 called The Coal Question. William Stanley Jevons wrote about it. And he pointed out, so this goes back to 1865. So since then, the people paying attention have known that if there's a finite material, say the water in this glass or the oil on Earth, then anything that I don't drink, somebody else is going to drink. So that negates the idea of conservation. The other piece of Jevons paradox is that the better we become technologically at efficiently using fossil fuels, the faster we use them up. And a classic example emerged in the wake of the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, when the automobile manufacturers did not produce a bunch of cars that used fuel more efficiently. They produced vehicles that had more power in their engines. So they took the same amount of gasoline, put it into an internal combustion engine that had more power instead of getting you more miles for the gallon. So that's an overall summary of William Stanley Jevons's idea presented in the coal question in 1865. Can your dog get COVID? I don't know, but your dog can certainly carry the virus, many, many viruses in their fur. So when you come into the park and somebody's dog runs up and wants to be petted, you might want to keep your mask on. Do I think the current heat wave in Siberia could impact the methane hydrates just off the coast, or would they need some other event to trigger a release? I think any amount of warming in that region is a bad idea, and warming the relatively shallow seabed of the Siberian Arctic shelf only a little bit will likely trigger a significant methane release. Have you considered the possibility that the current diminished aerosol masking effect has been planned to reduce population in an effort to draw on Earth's resources? Yeah. And I thought about it for 10 seconds and I moved on. Reducing population? That reduces industrial activity, remember? And reducing industrial activity causes a spike in global average temperature. Nobody survives that. So there's no reasonable way to abruptly reduce the human population on Earth and have survivors persist. Talk about the impact of global masking and the virus on rising climate temperatures. I've done that already in this chat and written about it repeatedly at guymcpherson.com. So we've been on here for an hour and 25 minutes, and I'm nearing the end of my ability to hang in there. So I'm not going to answer that question again. You know, I understand that capitalism is based on scarcity. I understand that capitalism is a bad idea. Thank you for that latest donation. But we're again falling into the pattern that humans like to fall into or are prone to falling into, which is to blame somebody else. Blaming capitalism when I'm willing to bet that everybody involved in this conversation is in a capitalist system doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Blaming anybody doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This was all triggered before any of us were born. So let's not point fingers. Amor fati. Amor fati. AMORFATI. The Latin. Love the fates. Love whatever fate you are brought. Love your life. Love the people around you. Don't blame people in the past, present, or future for what happened in your life. Instead, love what you've got. Horrible things have happened to you. Horrible things have happened to me. So what? I can be angry. I can have all kinds of negative emotions about the things that have happened in the past. None of that does any good. I choose instead to love my life. So let's try some more of that. I don't even know about the new book by Schellenberger about the hype of climate change. But if Schellenberger says that climate change is a hoax, then clearly Schellenberger is an idiot. Do I have plans to work with Paul Beckwith? No. I work with scientists. He's not one. I work with scientists who are professors. He's neither. Is it possible to act rationally without being attached to the outcome? I don't know. That's been my goal for the last several years. Is it working? I don't know. Sometimes I'm still angry. Some of you noticed it even today. Within the last hour and a half, I've been angry. Yes, what's happening in the Arctic is our biggest threat right now. Have I dabbled with the psychedelic healing plants such slash fungi in the past? What is your opinion of them? So this is an interesting story. Not sure if I should tell it. I could get in trouble for this sort of thing. Whatever. Anyway, a friend of ours came and he brought psychedelic mushrooms with him, and we went to a nearby nature reserve. This is when we were living in New York State, and we went out and we each gobbled a cap and a stem, the three of us, our friend and my partner and I. And the responses were amazing. My partner had tried them before, and all she did was giggle for the whole time. This other guy who secured the shrooms went wildly angry because they had no impact on him. And so he tracked down the guy who sold them to him and complained to him because they didn't work. And he told me that's what he was going to do. And I'm like, you think this isn't working? And the whole world was all screwed up as far as I was concerned. I entered this epic battle, at least in my mind, it was epic, between my will and my inability to give in. So I couldn't give in to the psychedelic phenomena. I was fighting it through the whole thing. Finally, we went back home like 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. It's still daylight. I decided I have to demonstrate my control. So I flossed and brushed my teeth, took a shower, and went to bed at 6 o'clock at night just to show that I was in control of myself. And that's exactly the wrong way to go. So I won, and in winning, I lost. I lost the effect that psychedelics are intended to have. So that didn't work out nicely at all. All right. What temperature does grain stop producing? It depends, but at the surface, and I'm going to use, let's see, I think it's 40 degrees Celsius, just over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that photosynthesis breaks down, can't keep up with degradation, can't keep up with respiration. So net photosynthesis goes negative. So if the temperature at the surface is at approximately 100 degrees, plants can't keep up. But some plants are more sensitive than that 40C mark because they're what's called cool season plants. And winter wheat, for example, falls into that category. So the cool season plants can't photosynthesize enough to produce grains even below that temperature. Do you think that when things get bad, you will just suffer and die? Or will you consider death by non-painful injection? I don't have the means to non-painfully inject myself. I don't have a syringe. If I had one, and every time I went to a medical doctor for like the last 10 times I went, and this goes back to more than a dozen years because I haven't been to a doctor for a long time, but every time I went for many times in a row, I asked for lethal doses of morphine. And finally, one of the medical doctors, who looked like she was 12 years old, told me that simply asking a question like that allows her to call the people on the phone that could come and put me in a straitjacket and lock me up for the rest of my life. So I stopped kidding about that. I know Ernst Mayr and his work. He was an amazing human being. Published his last book when he was 101 years old, I believe it was. But he wasn't a particular inspiration for me because that was too early in my life, or maybe too late in my life. But it was the wrong time in my life in any event for inspiration to come in that intellectual sort of way. You seem to be the only one not selling gold or long-term food storage. Are you selling anything? No, I'm not selling anything. In fact, somebody asked me to review the movie Who Farted? In which I had a little tiny part based on a speaking tour I conducted in the Toronto, Ontario, Canada region a few years ago. So the movie just came out, and this guy asked me to review it for him because he said I was an influencer. And so could I please view it and tell him what I thought? And I started to view it about a month ago, and then I got busy 3 seconds in, so I just abandoned it. So he wrote to me a couple of days ago, and he said, "Have you got any quotes for me about that?" And I said, "No." I told him what happened, that I just ran out of time. And he says, "I'll send you $1,000 if you watch it." And I said, "Okay, that's a fine deal." And then later I wrote to him and said, "No, I'm not going to take your $1,000 because then people would interpret whatever I said as being paid to say. So I'm not going to write a review of a movie that you paid me to review." So I provided what I thought was a very fair and reasonable review, very positive, with one exception, and that is that the film failed to mention the aerosol masking effect, which is what I've come to expect. And so that was the only negative comment in my review. And so I'm just trying to make it perfectly clear and stay completely upfront about this, that I'm not doing any of this for money. I don't think we have long. I'm living accordingly, and I'm not going to take money that is sent to me for doing a job like reviewing a movie. So I will work for other means that I think is legitimate work. I think what I'm doing in this case with this chat is actual work. At least my armpits are telling me that. And so I'm happy to take your donations, but not if it might influence what I'm going to say. So I think that's an important distinction. Guy is going to find a suicide booth. Yeah, one that takes quarters. You seen the change has been disappearing lately, at least in the United States? Didn't you think there would be more higher temperatures by now as a result of the loss of aerosol masking? No. I think there have been very high temperatures that have been recorded. The records I've seen, mostly from the United States, indicate higher temperatures. The same is true from reported temperatures in China, India, and Eurasia. So there were abrupt rises in temperature throughout the globe, just as I expected. They were commonly reported even in the corporate media. How do I expect to die? That's a fine question. I can imagine one of two ways. We live in Central Florida, where it's hot and humid on a regular basis. When the air conditioner stops working here for a couple or 3 days, maybe a week, that probably would be enough for me to die from the results of lethal wet bulb temperatures. So we will certainly experience lethal wet bulb temperatures here. And when the air conditioning goes out, that's going to be very inconvenient. So perhaps I'll die from organ failure from lethal wet bulb temperature. My goal is to die from eating too much ice cream, but I'm not sure there's enough time for me to do that. I have spoken about the 2020 solar minimum. It's in one of the Edge of Extinction videos on the blog. There's no possible way for us to sequester so much carbon through regenerative farming practices that we get below 300 parts per million. No way that can possibly happen in the very short time we have left. Would that compensate for the aerosol masking effect? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. When do you expect the stock market to crash? A dozen years ago. Actually, more than that. Mag says you will lose your mind first in the lethal wet bulb temperature. It could explain the Deep South issue with Trump support. Most people think I've lost my mind already, so we don't need to worry about that. Kevin Hester points out that he has a post on his blog titled Wet Bulb Temperature Soon Will Become Leading Cause of Death. That's at kevinhester.live. Kevin Hester, all run together just like it sounds, .live. The post is Wet Bulb Temperature Soon to Become Leading Cause of Death. Why not put this format in Zoom live streamed to YouTube so folks could actually communicate a more extensive Q&A session or understanding rather than format? Thanks for the idea, Forrest, and we'll take it under consideration. I'm not the techno wizard here. I'm the Luddite. So I'll talk with Pauline about how to proceed in the future. All right. Thank you, Environmental Coffee House. And please don't apologize if you don't have the money to donate now or anytime in the future. I'm not doing this for money. I suspect I have enough money to last until my final days because I don't think that'll be very long from now. Who's your most inspirational person from human history? Ooh, that's a tough call. I've been influenced by the writing of a lot of people, most notably Edward Abbey, who turned me into an anarchist at a pretty young age. In fact, the book I'm writing right now is a response to this book. This book by Edward Abbey is called A Voice Crying in the Wilderness. The book I'm working on now is called Another Voice Crying in the Wilderness, My Homage to Edward Abbey. And as with Abbey's book, the last book he wrote, in fact, he finished writing it, as I understand it, 11 days before he died. My book will be a collection of aphorisms or expressions or sayings, relatively short pieces. And my goal when we started this little chat this afternoon was to read you some of those from my current chapter 4, Life and Death and All That. I have 13 chapters with the same titles Abbey used in this book. 13 chapters. One of them is Life and Death and All That. And I was going to talk about memento mori and memento officium and amor fati, because generally there's not enough questions and responses in this sort of format, so I feel like I need to fill space. Fortunately, you guys asked great questions and kept the conversation rolling along, so I didn't have to drag you through any of my recent work. Hopefully that book will be out soon. So, Pauline, can we please shut this down in the very near future? Here's a question. Do you think extreme heat will bring about the end, or will it be slow and painful death due to food shortages? I think it's all of the above. Already, according to the peer-reviewed art literature, people are dying at various places around the planet because of lethal wet bulb temperatures. This is a paper from 2 or 3 weeks ago. I included it in my Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored essay, so you can find it there. Somebody asks, professors make or break their careers on their position on things. What would happen if Hansen, Anderson, Mann what would they need to say to increase their credibility on climate change? I think they have very little credibility on the topic of abrupt climate change. First of all, they won't even admit that it's happening. We're in the midst of the fastest warming event, probably in planetary history, and certainly in the span of humans on the planet. And you won't get any of the three of them to admit that. So I think their credibility is seriously endangered already. I read a lot of Thoreau in high school. Thanks for bringing that up, Rich. And so I was influenced by Henry David Thoreau and his writings, of course. Had an opportunity to see his gravestone a couple of times, once on tour and once when he lived in New York State. Meg says she needs a sandwich board, says the end is near. No, my sandwich board, if I ever get one, will be the end is being completely ignored. All right, Pauline, please, can we shut this down before I collapse and die? An hour and 45 minutes is long enough.
Say thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, very much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for the donations that you made. I very much appreciate the questions and the donations. This gives me an opportunity to continue my teaching, albeit in a different form, but nobody's teaching on campus these days. So this is as good as it gets. Thank you for participating. I very much appreciate it.
Invite them to join.
If you would like, please join the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel in addition to subscribing. And when you subscribe, hit subscribe and then hit the bell so you get a notification when I've posted something or will post something. So thank you all very much. I'm signing off now unless senior management tells me something I forgot to say.
Thank you, everyone. You guys are awesome. Seriously. And your comments are amazing and funny and deep and poignant. And it means a lot. Thank you so much.
So
we'll see you. We're going to post when the next stream is. We
it'll
don't know when that
probably be
is.
in about 10 days.
Because he has to get his rest.
Because you're killing me. I have to do my laundry. You have no idea what you just did to this shirt. All right.
Yes. Leaf beer. Yes. Yum, yum, yum.
Everybody take care. Be safe. Thank you very much.
Bye, y'all. Wear a
Bye-bye.
mask.